The Green Umbilical Cord by Jamie McArdwell. Andrew lived in his studio atop the garage in back of a huge desolate house that faced the ocean. The main house had remained empty, boarded up, since Marguerite's disappearance some 4 years before. The studio was Andrew's only home now. To reach it, he had to walk through what once had been his wife's garden, past rose bushes that had long since gone to seed and strangled themselves on their own roots, past a couple of undernourished and decadent pyracantha bushes, whose berries were of such pure quality that neither bird nor bee professed an interest in them. And then there was a patch of sunlight, and a brilliant green fire, the ivy. It ran up the south side of the garage, streamed across the roof of the studio, and flowed like a sluggish jade river down the north side. The leaves were monstrous. They crowded, pushed, shoved, and vied with each other to be the largest, the shiniest, the ones closest to the sunlight. Some of the main creepers were the size of a strangler's wrist. On the east side, streamers had grown through an old porch swing and lifted up until it now hung askew, suspended in space, some 3 feet from the ground. When an offshore breeze was blowing from the southwest, the entire garage and studio looked as though it were alive, festooned with millions of green vampire bats, all quivering their little wings as they fed at an unsuspecting host. Ivy had slithered through the eaves into the studio room itself. Streamers had crept through the windowsill and grown until it was quite impossible to open, completely close, or even see through, the glass. It had fearlessly invaded the chimney during one summer, and fanned out so rapidly that it choked the draught and made the fireplace much too smoky to use. The creepers inside the studio hung down, swaying, always in movement, like the trailing tentacles of a hungry Portuguese man-of-war. In some sections of the room, ivy was entwined on chair rungs, through bed springs, and looped around lamps. It had insinuated itself on the bookshelf, shoving off paperback novels and scholarly works alike. When Andrew lay in bed and gazed up, he saw a solid carpet of green across the ceiling and beams. He liked what he saw. The ivy was his. It had always been his, ever since the day the first cutting had been brought home by him and placed in a water tumbler. Even Marguerite admitted the ivy was his. The house was hers, the car was hers, the bank account hers. The ivy could belong to Andrew. All of the other flowering plants and trees, however, were his wife's possessions. She had won a fabulous number of prizes at the county fair for her green thumb. If ribbons had been passed out for black hearts, she would have won one of them too. Because she considered herself unequalled as a botanist, Marguerite sneered at Andrew's pathetic little ivy plant. When he appeared undaunted by her taunts, she sneered at his pathetic little body and spirit. She predicted the ivy would wither and die. Once, Andrew caught her sprinkling salt around the plant. Silently, he nursed his baby back to a spindly, undernourished existence again. Then one night, in a fit of pique over something else, Marguerite had struck at him while he was peeling potatoes. For the first time in their marriage, he hit back, unfortunately forgetting to put down the knife before he struck. And while she lay on the floor gasping like some huge bulging-eyed gutted fish, he proceeded to finish the job by filleting her. The deed took 5 hours and 32 minutes. It would have taken only 5 hours, but Andrew paused to watch the Beverly Hillbillies on television. Once the deed was completed, the bones were placed in an old plant fertilizer sack and carried to the ocean. The fillets de Marguerite were buried alongside the garage, right next to the ivy plant. A most remarkable thing occurred within a few days. The ivy, which had been puny and white until then, suddenly began to take on a healthy green colour. It strengthened. It grew. In one day alone, it put out 10 new creepers and stretched upward with eager little fingers for a distance of 8 inches. At the end of 3 months, the ivy had covered the entire south side of the garage. Inexplicably, however, on the first anniversary of Andrew's bereavement, the ivy's upward growth stopped. It began to lose some of its lustre. Frantically, Andrew started extra waterings. He purchased the very best commercial fertilizers and plant foods available. He mothered the plant as best he could. It was all to no avail. Andrew was not a scientist, but even a layman can understand simple cause and effect. Thus it was that he soon came to the conclusion that the plant was suffering from lack of organic nutrients, similar to that which had been added a year before. He tested this hypothesis by grinding up a particularly loathsome, yapping little Pekingese that had kept him awake for some nights running by its shrill and totally uncalled for barking. The ivy reacted, not as strongly or as rapidly as Andrew wished, but enough to prove that he was correct in his basic assumption. A Siamese cat was the next to go. The ivy did not care for Siamese cats. It developed ugly black blotches on some of its leaves. The marks went away shortly after a huge St. Bernard disappeared. At the end of 3 months, enough domestic pets had been reported as missing that even the newspapers felt compelled to comment on it. Although the ivy remained fairly healthy during these ministrations of organic nutrients, its spectacular growth had ceased. Naturally, Andrew was concerned, as would be any conscientious mother who sees her offspring suffering from malnutrition. After considerable deliberation and several days of scanning the vital statistics page of his newspaper, Andrew paid a visit to the churchyard by moonlight. The digging was surprisingly easy, just as the moon was gingerly lowering itself into the cold waters of the sea. Andrew lugged his newly acquired plant food out to his bicycle and placed it, bent in the middle like a rolled-up rug, across the back rack. He then pedalled somewhat apprehensively home. Finally, Andrew's theory was proven. His baby grew again, rapidly, pulsating with a new life. It swept in a green tide across the roof of the studio and had made it halfway down the north wall when it ran out of steam. A short time later, a gas company employee became entangled in the ivy while reading the meter outside the garage. His shouts for help brought Andrew blinking down into the sunlight. He decided the meter reader was a gift from the gods. One of those things obviously ordained. One of those wonderful coincidences that one simply does not question. By now, Andrew had become quite proficient. The deboning process took less than 2 hours. How the plant grew! It completely encircled the building and began its intrusions through windows and cracks. The creepers became thick, and one could almost feel the power surging through those green arteries. Of course, the increased size did present certain problems. Food, for example. A shapely, red-headed bank teller named Melissa was the next to become fodder. Then, in quick succession, a myopic, pigeon-toed writer with a red beard, a radio disc jockey, an English lady watercolourist, an argumentative lady Christian Scientist, a newspaper editor, and a nosy police inspector. Even Andrew was forced to admit that the last item on the menu was a mistake. The neighbourhood swarmed with newspaper men, television cameramen, FBI agents, insurance investigators, and curiosity seekers. One newspaper sensationally stated in a copyrighted story by its science editor that a sea monster had been sighted by usually reliable sources, and that the beast, 150 feet long and 3 sets of sharp teeth, could have been responsible for the missing persons. This report frightened Andrew so much that he ceased his nightly walks along the seashore. As a result of all the publicity, table d'hôte, on trees, for the ivy plant became very scarce. Although, by Herculean efforts and taking some tremendous risks, Andrew was able to scrounge up a small boy as an hors d'oeuvre. And finally, on a Sunday, after a week of no new food sources being found, Andrew was forced to put the ivy on a cold water diet. Feeling empathy for his beloved offspring, he himself went to bed that night after a dinner of only cold water. The offshore breeze sprang up about 10 o'clock. It caused the ivy leaves to rustle like vicious little rats scurrying hither and yon in agitation. The wind brought a cloud cover with it. The moon was veiled in film at first, before being blotted out altogether. Policemen, walking in nervous pairs on the beach, heard the high, thin, horrible screams, but were unable to place the direction from whence they came. It was 2 days later before the police hacked their way into Andrew's studio. The ivy creepers were everywhere. They hung down from the ceiling in great undulating curtains of greenery. Their leaves, like the tiny hands of babies, seemed to be waving, bye-bye. On the couch, the police could see Andrew. Ivy grew out of his mouth, his ears, out of his pyjama tops and bottom, and right in the middle of poor old maternal Andrew, the largest sucker root of all was firmly attached to his navel, like a green umbilical cord.